starts, our laughter and smiles will be real.
Yes, and we're on. Hello, everyone. My name is Joshua Gilliland, and I'm one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks. With me is Steve Chu, who I will admit is an assistant U.S. attorney down in San Diego, and Naria Ely, who is with the U.S. courts, and that's all that we'll say. Nor where is she? But that
31.
Undisclosed location.
Yeah, it's in a bunker. Not doing those secret cases. No, not that one.
No.
But we're here to talk about the fourth episode of Lower Decks, the Moist Vessel, which is a disturbing name on so many levels. And we're going to have some fun because this was just a great love letter to Wrath of Khan and a bunch of other tropes that are popular in Star Trek. So, Steve, you took the lead on the away team in writing the outline. So, can you help us understand what we have to talk about here?
Absolutely. So this, I'll say we were commenting just before we got on here too. We're at episode 4 now of this new show, and this show is a lot of fun. You know, for any Star Trek fan, I think new fans and old fans, it is full of Easter eggs, callbacks. It is obviously written by people who love Star Trek, original series, DS9, Next Gen. I mean, there's just references everywhere. The storytelling is very good. The characters are compelling. I know that it's really starting to get to me because I do find myself humming the theme song when I'm walking around. And I'm thinking, wow, okay, yet another theme song. And I was watching Voyager last night, and yet I was still thinking of Lower Decks. So this is, well done. It's just, I think more than, we want so much out of Star Trek, right? We want stuff that challenges us, makes us think, helps us to grow, see new points of view. But more than anything, I think we want it to be fun. And I think this show has just been so much fun. What do you guys think?
Nari?
Absolutely agree. All of that. I'm trying to think of what I can add. It's been an absolute pleasure to watch. And I think it's only gotten better as it's gone on. And I was completely blown away by the first episode. I know this is skipping through your outline, but I was just going to mention that, they do have a little more, I think they have the maximum number of bleeped words before it gets an R rating or whatever the equivalent is on TV.
Right.
There's a limit. I think it's at 3. But I actually think that that's really good in the sense that I think the lower decks are usually perceived as the equivalent of enlisted in the military, whereas the upper decks are the officer class. And there does tend to be a culture difference, and at least in my boyfriend's experience, I've never been in the military, but they do talk like normal people, often have coarse humor and things like that. So it's kind of refreshing to hear people being kind of frank and open with each other, since there are no officers around, there are no dignitaries around.
Right. They can sort of let their guard down, and they can be real, right? We can see that even in the 24th century, heck, people let their guard down. They can curse, they can complain, just because you're in Starfleet, not everything's perfect. Naval conditions maybe in some ways have not changed that much in, however hundreds of years, right?
Yeah, there's a reason why, there's the term swear like a sailor. And
yes.
if you've been on a boat and things are broken, you can swear. You also can find religion really fast in a storm. So there are those factors in play as well. That said, I do love this show because Tuesday is Star Trek Day, the anniversary of the Man Trap premiering. And I'm going there. And
it's coming Tuesday, right? I didn't miss it.
Yeah,
wow.
September 8th. And the original series premiering in the 60s, when there was horrible things happening in the country, whether it was people fighting for civil rights and getting hit with fire hoses and German shepherds, to the horror of the Vietnam War, and things that just were not good. At the same time, there's great optimism because we had the Apollo space program going, and so we had this weird mix of great hope and despair and stress happening at the same time. Looking at what we have right now, we have social unrest, we have cruelty happening, we have people who are standing up for civil rights, and God bless them for doing so. And there are riots. And so all those things that were stressful and scary in the late 60s are happening right now.
I can tell you, Josh, I feel very stressed.
Yeah, we all do, and everyone's freaked out, and rightfully so. But you throw in having Star Trek, and the difference with this Star Trek is there's more humor. You know, the original series did have humor. It was part of its charm but it wasn't like slapsticky. This is designed as a comedy, that's Star Trek. And so it's different, but it's nice having that stress release, whether it's after at work or you watch all the news and you think about, you know, how people are getting hurt and what to do to help. And it's a good way to decompress, so you don't like just lose it from all the pressure that everyone's feeling right now. So that's one of the reasons I love it dearly.
I also don't know about you two, but I definitely identify very strongly with some of the characters in this show. To an extent that I think was often not true of the highly idealized characters that you had, especially in like Next Generations and things like that.
Right, we have some very, very flawed, very human characters here.
So there was a comment that I remember that, again, I've quoted him multiple times because he's a good friend, but Matt Weinhold on Monster Party and Long List, and if you watch Trekkies, he's at the end of it with the joke about the holodeck. And like original series and Next Generation were, you know, aspiring, like what we want to be. DS9 is what we are, and while still trying to be optimistic. This is a little in the vein of DS9, that everyone's just doing their best. And sometimes you have to go clean out the holodeck, and it's disgusting. And like those are live issues. And if you can turn it into a game, maybe that can help keep you sane. So again, there's something magical and good about Star Trek and lower.
I just want to point out, normally for these 3 bleeps they have per episode, it is clear what the bleep is. The bleep that covers what they're cleaning out of the holodeck, which is apparently what they use the holodeck primarily for, is impossible to parse, and that was intentional. I'm sure it was.
and just and so we are going to talk about the episode, I promise. But you know, just to kind of come full circle on the point that you are making, Josh, that, you know, Star Trek is oftentimes a product of the times, you know, holding up a mirror to ourselves. That's some of the power of science fiction. You can tell some of the stories that you maybe could not otherwise tell by setting it in some fictional universe or alternate reality or whatnot, and, you know, do some impressive social commentary. So, you know, when we look around today, I think we are seeing that as well, both with, you know, the conflicts that we have, and every age has them. And then again, we have this fun show. So, you know, as the saying goes, the more things change, the more they stay the same, right? Plus ça change, plus la même chose. So anyways, let's get to the episode. Episode 4, Moist Vessel. We start off with the Cerritos. The Cerritos must work with the USS Merced. They are transporting what they call a generation ship. And we start off with a briefing. And we learn that Captain Freeman, in command of the Cerritos, also used to serve with the captain of the Merced, whose name is Captain Durango. They served together previously on the ship, the USS Illinois. And we get a briefing with senior staff. For some reason, Ensign Mariner is in there handing out pads. And being her usual disruptive self, she yawns. Durango takes offense. Mariner says, really kind of, what's the big deal, really? And you know, Durango, again, appears to like the sound of his own voice, so he keeps talking. And Mariner, once again, yawns. And, you know, Durango gets angry.
Which he looks like a Tellarite. And looking back, looking back to Journey to Babel, like
They were hot-headed.
Yeah, they're hot-headed. So
Yes.
she should not antagonize somebody with that trait because that's how they roll. So
Do not antagonize the easily antagonizable, if that's a word. But yes, right. Point very well taken.
Oh my God, you're absolutely right. He is a Telluride.
A little assumption of risk there, right, Josh?
yeah, it's again, all those high school and college years not dating gave me that knowledge. Too.
So Captain Durango is angry, and he calls out Ensign Mariner. Is Mariner, or should Mariner be in any trouble here, Nari?
Yes. So in ordinary life, that would just be, your boss would get mad at you, you would face the consequences. There wouldn't be any legal problems out of being disrespectful towards someone. Disrespect, however, is in fact a punishable offense in the Uniform Code of Military Justice. There's two provisions, one applying to enlisted and one applying to officers. So the enlisted one is actually called insubordinate conduct towards a warrant officer, non-commissioned officer, or petty officer. I think ensign usually means that she is in fact an officer of the lowest rank.
Yes.
So we would go to instead Article 89, which is disrespect towards superior commissioned officer. And that is literally the subsection is subsection A, disrespect. Any person subject to this chapter who misbehaves with disrespect towards that person's superior commissioned officer shall be punished as a court-martial may direct. And I just want to point this out. This is only tangential, but I just want to point this out because I sincerely hope this comes up in a future episode. Subsection B is assault of a superior officer. Fun fact, there are two penalty provisions that are made very, very clear that they are distinct. The first is during time of war, in which case it'll be punished by death or such other punishment as the court-martial may direct, and not at war at any other time by such punishment other than death. So big difference between whether we're at war or not for the assault one.
I'm reminded of one of the Harry Mudd episodes. It might have been Mudd's Women, where Mudd says, "Do you know the penalty on this planet for this?" And Spock says, "Yes,
it's violation of patent law.
Death by hanging, death by drowning, death by shooting." And Mudd just says, hey, the problem is death. So,
yes.
Right. So, I have a feeling that if Ensign Mariner has an attorney, and she probably should keep one on retainer, she's going to keep her attorney pretty busy with the way she typically conducts herself.
Yes. I think what does occur, by the way, is probably characterized as a non-judicial punishment, which is typically what you do for something that isn't really serious. Is instead you impose, it's still documented is the thing. So that's one issue with imposing some kind of informal punishment, is that it doesn't appear to be documented as this is what we're doing to punish her.
Right.
So that itself is a procedural problem, but it could be interpreted as a non-judicial punishment. She's not going through a court-martial, but she's still getting disciplined.
And, short of a court-martial, there are other means. There is the captain's mast, that can be done on a naval vessel as well. And that's, that could be an option. Although Mariner she loves the brig and no discipline seems to bother her. More on that in a moment. But, Josh, why don't we talk about hazarding a vessel? We've got 2 Starfleet ships and a generation ship.
Yeah, so the captain of the Merced, which there's a theme with West Coast cities in this episode and the next. And so I just find that fascinating. But if you're in command of a vessel, you shouldn't do anything reckless with said vessel. And we have Captain Durango order his ship to get closer because he felt slighted that the Cerritos was in a more honored position. And that caused a breach in the hull of the generation ship and the Genesis material to travel via tractor beam and infect the Merced.
And the Cerritos.
Yes, right.
So 2 vessels just got hazarded. And so
3. I think we count the colony ship too.
Yes,
which just had part of its hull blown out.
Yeah, even though they're all dead, but still, it's historically good to have. But you have willful and wrongful hazarding, which is when any person subject to this chapter who willfully and wrongfully hazards or suffers to be hazard any vessel or aircraft of the armed forces shall be punished by death or such other punishment as a court-martial may direct.
There's a lot of these, it seems, that have death as a possible penalty.
Death is quite a motivator, isn't it?
Yeah, and so again, this is old school. And then there's negligent hazarding. Any person subject to this chapter who negligently hazards or suffers to be hazard any vessel or aircraft of the armed forces shall be punished as a court-martial may direct. I actually think he engaged in willful hazarding because he wanted his ship to get closer, knowing there was a risk, and it was a direct order from him. So this wasn't like they dodged a comet and got too close. This was, I feel slighted, get in closer. That's willful.
And also, am I misremembering this episode, or I believe after he gives the order, one of his bridge officers replies to him, "Sir, that's too close. It might cause serious damage." And he says, "No, do it anyway." So that kind of establishes at least the knowledge there that he knows that this is dangerous.
And in terms of motive, right before he gives the order, he's looking at an image of Captain Freeman, like his former colleague, and there clearly seems to be some sort of competition, friendly or otherwise, and healthy or otherwise, and in this case, very unhealthy. So Starfleet officers are not above envy and trying to claim the spotlight or be glory hounds. We have that DS9 episode. You guys may remember the baseball one where Sisko is competing against the Vulcan classmate who just has to outdo him in every way possible and rub it in his face. And it's only when Sisko says, "You know what, we're not going to play anymore," that the Vulcan gets upset, and he basically gets under his skin and wins a symbolic victory. But again, another recurring theme, holding that mirror at humanity, where we've come a long ways, but we still have a lot of competition and envy, and some of it is not healthy. So what do you think, Josh? You think the Captain Durango is in for it? He doesn't have much of a defense here?
Yeah, they probably want to execute him because they just don't do that in Star Trek. It also raises the issue that I haven't talked about before, but in the worst Star Trek movie ever made, Star Trek Beyond, that version of Kirk should have been executed for getting 94% of his crew killed. So yeah, that's definitely hazarding a vessel as well. So
I just want to point out, as Star Trek geeks, according to at least one episode of Star Trek, there remains only one crime in Starfleet code that remains punishable by death. And it is visiting, I forget the name of the sector right now, but it's visiting the sector in which the aliens from the pilot live. It was declared off limits after they left the menagerie.
Yeah.
Yes. So at least according to that episode, it is the only death penalty left in the books in Starfleet code.
To go visit the Telosians.
Yes,
there we go.
Good.
The Telosians, yes.
And they were in Discovery too, which was great.
Yeah,
that's right. It's like Telos 4 or something like that. Exactly.
Yes. So
So we've got some issues with competition, ship to ship. But let's go back to the Cerritos now and some of our main characters. So Mariner, who is obviously feeling the wrath of her mother and the ship's captain, Captain Freeman, following her insubordination or her disrespect to Captain Durango, the command staff, at the suggestion of the XO, Captain Freeman decides, all right, well, why don't we just assign her to all the worst jobs on the ship? And the point being punished.
As, by the way, her idea.
Right, you're right. This is all from a certain point. It all depends on your point of view, right? So, this is Captain Freeman's idea of the worst jobs on the ship. She gives them to Mariner. Mariner at first is a little dismayed, but she always seems to find a way to have some fun, and she ultimately does. Succeeds here as well. She creates some competitions out of some of these jobs and has some fun. Nari, let's take Mariner's side here for a moment. If you're an employee that's being punished, do you have some sort of recourse here? And I'm sure she feels she's unjustly being punished.
Yeah, so it depends. I mean, as any good lawyer would tell you, it depends. But the first thing to note is that, there might be a Title VII issue if you could make some kind of argument that Mariner was engaging in some kind of protected activity. Maybe her speaking her truth to power there was some kind of whistleblowing activity. I seriously doubt that, just because all she was saying was it's boring. That's usually not considered a protected disclosure. Yeah. But yeah, so, and I want to emphasize that I think a lot of people, and I had to do a lot of intake calls when I worked at a labor and employment firm, and I can't tell you how many people who called in explaining their horrible workplace, environment, or this thing that happened, how many times I had to tell people, look, there's a lot of bad things that can happen in a workplace. There's a lot of crappy bosses out there who do mean things, wrong things, but most of it is not legally actionable. A lot of it at least isn't. And so in this case, in order for Title VII to apply, there has to be some kind of hook. It's got to be an intolerable work environment because she did something that's protected, or she is part of some protected class. Not just that, it also has to be really severe. This isn't just like your average, ordinary, uncomfortable workplace, which is, this is one of the universal sources of humor, is that you have a bad boss or something like that. Most Americans relate to that in some way.
It's kind of like The Office in space, right?
Yes, yeah. Exactly. However, there are actually probably protections here for Mariner. In federal employment, there are always certain procedures that are required by law and the merit system in order to undertake some kind of adverse employment action. And even if you're not a government employee, you might have contractual protections that guarantee you certain procedures before adverse actions. Or if you're in a unionized environment, you might have a collective bargaining agreement that almost certainly gives you certain procedural protections that have to be followed before the employer does something to you. And in this case, the employer has done something. The employer has assigned her deliberately, actually it doesn't really matter about deliberately for the moment, but has assigned her to all of the worst tasks. This looks to be, to any reasonable person, an intolerable working environment, right? It's assignment after assignment, which are considered extremely unpleasant, that everyone normally shares to a small degree, but she's getting it every day. Now, this is what would be called employment law, perhaps, in a constructive demotion. Now, that's a little bit of a harder argument to make than a constructive discharge, because like a constructive discharge would be, your working environment was so intolerable, you actually didn't tolerate it and you left. A constructive discharge is a little bit tougher to make, but it could be under a theory like, I was assigned all of these worst positions under the same pay, right? Or I was asked to take on additional responsibilities for no additional pay, or I was asked to report to someone who had previously reported to me, things like that. And it's just important to classify that to make the argument that it fits the narrative of an adverse employment action, because that's the trigger for all of these procedural protections that you would have. Because there are lots of things that an employer might do to you, like assign you to a new project that would be benign, and they wouldn't have to go through 3 layers of procedure in order to do that. So you would have to come up with this argument about it being a constructive discharge if she quit because of it, or a demotion if she didn't. And it seems to me like this would, for most people, except Mariner, because apparently she's fine with it, fit into the category of constructive punishment, even if it's not being called punishment.
Yeah, I think that's pretty clear. I mean, the goal from Captain Freeman for doing this is to get her, make her so miserable that she has to leave. So
yes, that is literally
right there.
Discharge.
Yeah, you're not saying you're fired, but you are saying you're going to do all these horrible things until you yourself quit. So I think yes, she's got a bit of a case there, but the problem still seems to be the well, I mean that's possible. She doesn't have the protected activity, but if we change the facts a little bit, and let's kind of go back to what Joshua talked about earlier, hazarding a vessel. Here's a hypothetical. Let's say that Durango, before he moves over and steals the premium position, with the Merced, let's say he's about to do it and then doesn't, and somehow Mariner witnesses that and reports it and then gets punished for that. That would be closer to the classic whistleblowing type of situation where you're telling on or you're ratting out some people in power for doing something bad or potentially bad, and now you should be protected under the law because the law wishes to protect people who do that. The law wants to encourage people to do that. Does that sound right? What do you guys think?
That does. I just want to emphasize for anyone watching who is considering doing whistleblowing, be sure to do your research about the relevant statutes that may protect you. There's usually pretty good primers, especially for federal employees, just because you want to be sure that you dot your I's and cross your T's, you know exactly what's protected and what's not. And if you really feel like it, you may want to consult a lawyer.
Again, I guess we have to have the obligatory sort of disclaimer that, yeah, we're not providing legal advice to specific people here. This is for entertainment and hopefully educational purposes.
Yeah.
Josh, any thoughts there on Mariner's, her poor draw of work assignments?
Yes. Sometimes you do draw that lot because you screw up. So I think there's a fine line between rewarding people for their negative conduct with negative jobs. And since she's a disrespectful little brat, it's like, okay, that's what you get. Like these jobs do need to be done. And we're just going to give them all to you because you can't play nice with anyone.
So I agree, Josh, but even in the military, there is still a lot of process that's required. And so this is what I was saying, is that non-judicial punishment includes like, you disrespected me today, so now you're going to go clean the latrines with a toothbrush, which is, I think, what happens in Forrest Gump.
That's right.
And that is actually a real thing, but that's still documented, right? It's not written down as though you had a conviction for a crime in your record. That's what you go through a court-martial for. But it's still documented. They don't just informally say off the books, you're going to do this, because they could continue to torture you. It has to be written down. So there's still a level of process, even for a relatively small informal disciplining. So Captain Freeman totally could have done this on the books, but she's doing it off the books, and that's problematic.
Well, I think Mariner serving on the Cerritos is problematic just because it seems to be...
To begin with,
yeah,
it's a bit of a powder keg, isn't it?
Yeah, there's nepotism at play, because if she...
Or reversed, yeah.
She wants to get...
You take her. Like, we don't need this crap anymore. She's your problem. And
But yeah, a personal bias, one way or another, by the captain against a subordinate would be a problem. Issue.
So then we get to just a very bizarre situation and some clever storytelling, by the writers here. So the captain realizes that her goal is still the same. She wants to make Mariner so miserable that she will leave. Giving her bad jobs apparently has not worked. So she decides to promote her. What does Mariner fear the most? She fears promotion for whatever reason, and we're learning a little more about that as we go on in the story. So now Mariner, the irony here is she achieves in punishment what others like Boimler most desire. She gets a promotion, she gets recognition, and let's count off some specific examples here. She's part of the in crowd. She actually has to conduct audits and then audit the audits. She gets to go to private performances. She gets invited to the senior officer's poker game, which we see over and over, in Next Generation. She gets her own private quarters. She doesn't have no more bunk mates or, common areas. She's got her own space for everything. And she's even invited to senior officer birthday parties. I mean, she's really on the fast track to success now. And yet she seems more miserable than ever. Nari, if we are going back to our job as Mariner's attorney, and she comes to us saying, "Oh my God, can you believe what they're doing to me?" I mean, does she have any recourse here? Does she have?
First thing we do, we withdraw as her attorneys.
You are just impossible as a client. Goodbye.
No. I just want to note also the list of things you read off that she was doing was, this is again evidence that the people who write this know and love Star Trek, because that is all of the things, or other than holodeck time, that you see senior officers doing in all of these shows. It's the talent shows, the endless talent shows. You hear them auditing all the time. I think there were at least 3 separate instances where Troy or Riker were complaining to each other about having to do crew reviews.
Right.
And the birthday parties. Anyway, so those are clearly people.
And I have to point out, you know, reference within a reference, but one of those crew evaluations was done in the Next Generation episode entitled Lower Decks.
Oh my goodness, I forgot about that. Oh my goodness.
One of my favorite episodes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, because you have the lower officers.
Also involve poker.
You have the lower office, the junior officers playing their poker game, and you know they're desperate. Sam Lavelle is desperate to be promoted, and they're trying to listen into Riker and Troy talking over at the other table about the crew evaluations. And Lavelle and Cito Jaxa are up for the ops position. Cito, who I think we should have seen a lot more of, but anyways, I don't mean to get off too far on a tangent.
Oh yeah. So, as Mariner's attorneys, I would politely advise her not to send us more attorney's fees on this one. So, if it was a little bit of a challenge to argue constructive, demotion before when she was just getting sent bad duties, and there was still a plausible theory there. This one, not so much. And
can you argue constructive demotion when you're actually promoted?
So actually, again, it depends. In other circumstances, this might work, right? It's not my answer is not a categorical no. And that's because it's very dependent on any given circumstances. What we're looking for when it comes to some kind of constructive discharge, if you feel that you've been forced out of a position because it became intolerable, might include something that is dressed up as a promotion. For example, let's say that, a person is a new parent or, and has to be at home for certain hours of the day, and they previously had a position that allowed them that flexibility, and then is promoted into a position that requires them to be in the office 9 hours a day, and then they have to quit, right? So they have to pick between being a parent or having the job, or there's a woman who becomes pregnant and is promoted into a position that requires her to be on her feet all day or something like that. Those would be things where you would, even though it's called a promotion and it might even be accompanied by slightly more pay, you could argue that it was a constructive discharge, and it wouldn't be absurd. You would still have to do the work of convincing a judge or a jury that was the case, but that's a colorable theory there. This one.
No, I was just going to say, and I think you're absolutely right, Nari. But it's we're coming at it from the reverse angle, but it gets us to the same place, which is the captain trying to figure out what is it that Mariner hates. She doesn't actually hate the bad jobs. What she hates is the responsibility. So let's give her more of that, even though it's dressed up as a promotion.
And even though, pretty much everyone else in that track wants, especially Boimler, wants nothing more than that. This one, I'm going to say probably not, and it's because there's a reasonableness element attached to these things. She just doesn't like having these jobs. She just doesn't like being with those people. But to any reasonable person, being promoted from ensign to a command level officer, getting your own private quarters, having access to the good locator, patterns or whatever that is, would be a categorical boon. And it would be just difficult. I'm not saying you couldn't make the argument. It would just be very difficult to convince any judge or jury that this was
Josh, any thoughts?
Yeah. There's a mantra in military services that rank has its privileges and rank has its responsibilities. And she seems to be allergic to responsibilities and deathly allergic to it. So Starfleet's not the right place for her. If she doesn't want to be responsible and follow rules, she should find another career path. So it's
Upper Decks is not her place. But this is, but as Steve and you and I, Josh, have talked about, this seems to be a continuing theme in Lower Decks, starting with the episode in which
Rutherford.
Oh, what's his name? Rutherford, yes, thank you. My favorite character. I have to start remembering his name. Rutherford goes on a journey to try to find a new position and ends up deciding that he was most happy where he was. That seems to be a theme in Lower Decks, that it is okay, maybe even good, to be not focused on climbing, on finding something new, but on being happy with where you are.
That's good until you refuse to grow. And if you're stagnant and refusing to evolve, there just seems very unhealthy. So it's one thing to go, this is not for me, and want out. But do you really want to be an ensign forever because you can't follow the rules? That you think mission briefings are boring? That you enjoy insulting people? It's really, it's not for her. And so if you can't deal with the responsibilities at all, it's best to find another career path. The problem is she's good at what she does. So she's in this weird paradigm of she almost finds peace with being able to function. And maybe she just needs to be away from her mother. But when she was on other ships with other captains, there were still problems. So it seems to be her and not just her mom. I think her mom's trying to correct the situation as opposed to just bouncing her out of the service. But yeah, there's a lot there.
Yeah, and Mariner seems to be much happier when she's sort of on the sidelines with the lower decks crew, and then she can make fun of the people sort of in the game, in the command chain, sort of taking pot shots at them or being a commentator. But when she's actually called up to the big leagues and has to get into the game, she's good at it, but she hates it. So, yeah, what future is there for her? I think, there's some real room for character growth here. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, management in any profession involves going to meetings, involves people debating things you don't want to hear debated. It's like, really, we're talking about chairs? And the captain going, buckle up. It's like, I've been to meetings in my professional life where people are talking about things. It's like, seriously? We're having a meeting on this?
I want to add also, and again, this is not based on firsthand knowledge, this is based on secondhand, but this happens somewhat frequently in the military where the natural chain of growth for a soldier or an officer usually involves greater levels of responsibility, but that usually means also eventually not being in the field, right? Eventually that puts you in a desk somewhere, being a staff officer. And a lot of people don't want to do that. What they enjoy is being with a unit or in charge of a unit or whatever, but in the field doing missions as opposed to being in a desk somewhere. And the other one is that what makes a great manager or strategist is not necessarily the best people who were in the field before, so that can also be a bit of a tension. I believe there is a mechanism by which somebody could refuse a promotion that puts them in a desk and instead go on a track that's called being like a warrant officer, but that might only apply to enlisted. I'm not a huge expert on this, so internet folks, you're welcome to correct me. But yes, there is some tension in the military where people who excel and love being in the field can feel like they're getting forced into this track that they don't want. I think there are possible alternatives, but after a certain point, maybe there is either you go up or you move on because you're being ordered.
You can't stay in one post forever. It's like, I like studying squid, so this is what I do. It's like, really? Okay. But again, this is the Star Trek universe where the historian can have a place on a starship. It's like, we need an artist. We need someone who does improv. And they'll find
in an episode of original series, they had a classicist for some reason on board.
So Star Trek has always kind of played up the romantic aspect of command and how everyone's sort of striving for command, which is not always true, but Star Trek does kind of push that narrative a bit, and we see a lot of people, growing on and getting their own ships. From the original series, Sulu gets the Excelsior, Spock is a captain, Montgomery Scott also is a captain. These are all people that can or do get their own commands. Next Generation as well, with Riker, Worf at some point too. Everyone kind of grows, and that's sort of one of the themes. But as Lower Decks kind of points out, maybe, as we keep saying, maybe what's important is to be happy with where you are, and kind of enjoy what you're doing. And this ties in a little bit with a change that we have seen in some of the recent Star Trek series. We've seen this in Star Trek Picard, and now in Lower Decks, where we actually get some cursing on the show. In Star Trek Picard, we get the Starfleet CNC, Kirsten saying, with all due respect, Picard, shut the F up, right? And we just get some flat out cursing there. And then here as well, we get this exchange between Freeman and Mariner when Mariner's accusing Freeman of acting improperly. Freeman says, it's called being a captain. Mariner, no, it's called being a D, four-letter word.
That's not an obscenity. It's okay to say it.
Okay.
Unless there are children in the room. So, but yeah,
they're in the next room. Yeah.
We don't know. We don't know if
right.
Who's going to be watching this.
Trek was always good about not having cursing, and I've heard complaints from some Trek fans that, I really wish they wouldn't have cursing. I just kind of like how it was sanitized. But I've heard the other angle too, which is, no, this is more real. This is how people are. I mean, I see both sides of that. You guys have any thoughts here?
You first, Josh. I kind of fronted my views at the beginning of the episode.
In moderation, because, you can have, people, professionals. I've seen lawyers swear like angry sailors because of stress. But we would never do that in court and never in front of a client. That type of blowing off steam is usually done in private because people are people, and that's where they would do that. The idea of somebody working with a wrench and they bang the crap out of their fingers, they're gonna swear. So there's that fine line between not everyone's gonna act like they're in church all the time, but that can't be their default of them swearing every other sentence, because that's not Trek. I don't mind a little. I have a problem with a lot, and which is one of the issues that was problematic on. Why am I suddenly blanking on the love letter to Star Trek? Why am I suddenly blanking on his that show? Seth.
Oh, yeah, no, I know you're talking.
Yeah,
I'm gonna blink.
This is what happens after a long day and lots of motion practice.
Seth MacFarlane's show.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Orville.
Thank you, Nari. Great show.
Yes, and that was exactly the thing I was thinking of. Why a lot of people really loved it was because the conversations.
But at
really
the beginning,
felt
they didn't know the balance. And that was the problem at the beginning of the Orville, and that there was just but they figured it out after a couple episodes. They got the right balance of what to have, and I think Lower Decks is okay. That it's they would swear at the appropriate time, and there was a series of memes that were like when the F word's appropriate, and was coming home and you see a kid wearing only a diaper covered in green paint, and there's handprints all over the wall, or somebody parachuting in and they're landing on alligators, stuff like that. That's when you would expect someone to let fly, because wow, the engine exploded and you're covered in oil. You would expect that. But what they're doing, I'm okay with.
Yeah, I'm gonna just again express my unbridled enthusiasm for how Lower Decks is handling this. I think it evokes the Orville, which really did get a lot of this kind of Star Trek with real people on it, right? In the first instance, and also this is a little cross-cultural. But the final episode I think it's the final episode of the first season of Mandalorian, in which stormtroopers are talking to each other, also really captured that. I mean, they're probably just enlisted schmucks chatting back and forth about an unpleasant duty. And there's a certain charm to that because it's so relatable for a lot of people. And so I think, Josh, you're right that like there's a certain type of conduct that we would consider, you know, completely inappropriate in certain professional environments. So like, you know, using this kind of language even in Star Trek when you're in a meeting before your other officers in a formal setting would be inappropriate. But when you're, you know, a lower decks officer talking amongst yourselves and, you know, ragging about your superior officers and things, that seems like exactly where this kind of stuff would come out. I agree that it's nice that it's not too much, especially just because, you know, people, including the audience members, but also in theory, lower decks people would have different levels of tolerance for different types of obscenity. I mean, Star Trek is all about cultural diversity. Presumably, there are some religious people. We definitely see some Bajorans on the ship who might be uncomfortable with certain types of obscenity. And I know that there are actually even people in real life who get very serious psychological reactions when they just hear curse words. That it's helpful to be mindful of, that it's not just, you know, oh, you have offended my sensibilities. It's,
Right.
oh, that makes me really
there's,
uncomfortable.
You know, the fighter pilots swear. Like, you know, there's well, at least they used to. I don't know what the current generation's like, but like that was one of the stereotypes. And, you know, there was an instance with Pete Conrad, the third man on the moon. You know, like he could let him fly, and he was very colorful, and good biography about him with that. So again, I could see.
Which also evokes an episode of Space Force, which we will podcast about soon.
Yeah, because there are times when there are times when that would make sense. I would expect engineers to swear that, you know, you're working on something, you're covered in goo, something breaks. Again, it would make sense. It'd be weird to hear him go like, "Oh darn," like, you know, like
right.
It's just like you just scraped your knuckles, you're bleeding, you're covered in oil, or you just got irradiated. You would expect someone to.
Oh my goodness, yeah. Oh dear.
You would expect some swearing, and people go like, "Oh, get him a towel and a hypo spray." Yeah,
and the pillow to shower.
Yeah, get him the screaming pillow.
And
it's more real. It's more real, right?
Yeah, because again, that would make sense.
Right.
And I just want to point out again that this would make perhaps a little more sense for Mariner specifically if she weren't a commissioned officer. Because, for example, the greatest Starfleet crewman of all time, O'Brien, refused many offers of commissioning because he wanted to avoid the type of pomp and over formality that seems to grate
so
Mariner
again,
so
the
much.
key, you know, there's some deep philosophical, you know, undercurrents here, but lower decks may be telling us that command isn't always what it's cracked up to be. You know, just because everyone is in a hurry to get there doesn't mean that that's the right path for everyone. So maybe the best path is to figure out what you like, figure that out, get there, and once you get there, just stay there, and you know, don't let them promote you or drag you out or anything like that. So moving onwards, then, you know, we get so we have this interesting sort of comparison, and it's always this ongoing comparison between Boimler and Mariner. Boimler, on the one hand, eager to impress, the overachiever, hardworking, does so much right, and yet gets so little of the credit. Mariner is the complete opposite. She doesn't care about getting credit. In fact, she runs away from it, but she is supremely capable. And now, through not caring, she has in fact gotten promoted. So Boimler says, you know what, if that's what it takes, I'm going to be bad. He decides, you know, we don't get to see bad Boimler go very far because, you know, right. The episode, it does have a time limit, but Boimler does spill some coffee on Commander Ransom. I know you have thoughts.
I have thoughts.
I'll preview them quickly, and I'll hand you the baton here, Nari. But this does evoke some famous tort cases, in particular one involving McDonald's and spilled coffee, something that is much maligned. But if I may, I'll just hit it a little bit. and that is people like to say that the tort system is broken and lawsuits are frivolous because you can sue restaurants for making you fat. You can sue restaurants for giving you so much sugar or so much salt. You know, and some of these are fair complaints. Absolutely, there are some concerns there. But the McDonald's example, what many people don't realize, you know, the soundbite you hear is someone sued McDonald's because they had coffee spilled on them. Okay, well, if that's all you hear, then that does sound unreasonable. What we don't typically hear is that the McDonald's coffee that was spilled on this lady gave her third-degree burns over parts of her body.
Large parts
McDonald's
of her body. Because
very large
sitting in her car, spilled on her lap, and she couldn't get it off very quickly.
And McDonald's had been previously warned about keeping their coffee too hot. And the evidence was that the coffee that McDonald's had was far hotter than it needed to be, far hotter than was the standard in the industry. So McDonald's was really taking some unneeded, unnecessary risks here and very badly injured someone. So when you hear that, you know, now the case I think sounds a little bit more reasonable. But what are your thoughts here, Nari?
I couldn't have said it better. It annoys me to no end when I hear people cite this as an example of a bad torts case. It is the poster child of the torts system working correctly. And in fact, when Boimler spills coffee on Ransom, like that could be pretty serious. I mean, granted, I assume that he did not ask the replicator to put it out at, I think it was like, what was it in the case? Something like 170 degrees. Like it was just shy of boiling. So like boiling is like what, 210, 215. It was like 190. And there were business reasons, straight up business reasons why McDonald's kept it that hot. It wasn't for the benefit of the customer because no customer is going to take a sip of 190 degree coffee and think this is great. But in any event, yeah, so I mean, that case was a case that McDonald's deserved to lose. They deserved to lose big. And the tort system relies on individual plaintiffs like this woman exercising that legal right. We have less regulation in common law countries like the United States than in civil law countries because we actually count on our citizens to enforce their legal rights in courts for private torts. And in this case, as a class action, when you can, not only did she have significant individual damages, but if she can get together a class of people, it really does force McDonald's to internalize that risk. So the hope is not just that people will be compensated for injuries that they have incurred, which is what the primary goal of what happens, but it's also designed to incentivize companies that if they are taking risks, that they internalize those themselves and don't pass them on unreasonably to their consumers or employees or users or whatever it may be. And the alternative would be to have a lot more regulation and a lot more direct enforcement. And that's not necessarily wrong. That's what a lot of civil law countries do. It's what a lot of countries other than the US do, even within the common law world. There's different balances between these two. But it does mean that you need to have a much more involved and larger government, and that's just something that we've opted out of in the United States to a certain extent.
So, I mean, these are all excellent points, and we're really kind of hitting on a lot of the arguments, the criticisms on one hand, and the supporting arguments on the other for tort reform and for, you know, how the American system of jurisprudence should proceed with regard to civil lawsuits. When individuals bring personal injury actions for injuries that they incurred against companies, corporations, governments, etc. You know, on the one hand, it can serve as a check and a balance and encourage good behavior, which, you know, that's the ideal, right? You know, on the other hand, you know, the argument on the other side would be, well, there's just too many of these cases, and those cases that you do want, you know, sort of the truly meritorious ones that can affect positive change, are more the exception than the norm. At least that's the argument, you know, that we hear. You know, the truth may be somewhere in between, but without diving too far down that rabbit hole of tort reform, because we are trying to be mindful of our own
one
time.
more quick thought, which was I can now bring in Article 9, subsection B of the Uniform Military Code, which is assault. If Ransom knew that this was intentional, he just assaulted a superior officer with a hot beverage.
The Ransom himself just got off the last episode attacking and injuring a mariner.
That was an inferior superior officer, which I'm sure is still,
right.
So that would still probably be, there's actually an article of the Uniform Code, literally, I kid you not, called the General Article, and it's a catch-all for anything that is not specifically covered, and it's just conduct unbecoming. So we would probably get ransom for conduct unbecoming at minimum for the sword in the foot. But for the coffee on the lap, that is an assault of a superior officer, and if the Federation is currently at war with anyone, are they? Maybe they're still at war with the Dominion in this? Who knows? I don't know what timeline this is in, but maybe they're at war with someone. Punishable by death.
Oof. There's the D word, rears its ugly head once again. Josh, any thoughts there, or should we move on to Ascension?
Ransom's line of "Are you insane?" was well said. And we can
insightful.
Trials are necessary. People need to sue when something bad happens. I was at an e-discovery conference. I won't say at what state. But there was a representative from general counsel from one of the power companies. And he did a great job of alienating the entire room when he aired his opinion of like, how dare people sue us? We're the power company. And it's like, you don't get licensed to kill people because you provide electricity. Like and if you are killing people or hurting people, or burning down their houses because you won't fix power lines, you deserve to get sued. That's the check and balance that we have in society to make sure that sort of thing doesn't happen. So I can't stand the tort reform crap because it's a pack of lies hired by marketing people, and it's just not true. So
skepticism is healthy. I will say, though, that the duty of care changes depending on the circumstances, depending on who the alleged tortfeasor is. So, maybe it's possible that the standard of care wasn't actually breached because, every other company in the industry has this particular policy, which the particular plaintiff is alleging was negligence. But yes, it depends. You are definitely, as far as I know, there is no immunity in the code for a private run power company. There's some complications with suing governments and government entities, but
I can't comment on that. And I will also remind people that the opinions expressed here are our own and not those of our employers or any superiors or entities for which we may be employed. So we say nothing controversial on this program.
Not at all.
Nope, justice needs to be done. But other than that,
and this is an academic philosophical debate here. So
Star Trek's lower decks, guys. Don't take it too seriously.
Yes, exactly.
Don't spill coffee on people intentionally.
Try not to hurt people.
We can agree on that. Let's not spill scalding beverages on each other.
Again,
right.
Are you insane?
So we move on to sort of the central conflict of the story, and we've already touched on it when the Cerritos and the Merced get entangled in the generation ship's technology, which basically organically transforms inorganic material into organic material, and the ships start to sort of fall apart, and we get a great team up with Mariner and her mother, Freeman, and they argue, and of course, like many parent-child relationships, when there is a lot of tension, what we see is behind it is what drives it a lot is the fact that the two are probably have more in common than they realize. And because of that, they see their own flaws reflected in the other person and puts them on edge, and they really just snap at each other. And we see that a lot with Mariner and Freeman arguing, and just, they both have to get in the last word about how everything could be a little better. They could have been faster, working on this equipment, faster scaling the wall or climbing down. But we get some nice mother-daughter moments there. And then we have sort of the B story, which is the Ascension, where Tendi, seem to have interrupted this ascension by, we believe he's Lieutenant Junior Grade O'Connor, was about to attain some sort of state of enlightenment, and then it gets interrupted. And this becomes a recurring story just throughout the episode until the point of the ship being in jeopardy. And Tendi and O'Connor are talking about it. O'Connor pushes Tendi out of the way and saves her life. And then suddenly, O'Connor begins to ascend. He has now suddenly achieved enlightenment, it appears. And this appears to be one of the recurring themes in Lower Decks, which is when Tendi says, I've been pretending to find myself for so long. I guess I actually did. It's usually when you stop trying to get something or stop looking for something that you actually find it. And that's what happens with them.
Also the perfect embodiment of fake it till you make it.
Exactly, right. Another great theme here. And, you know, Star Trek, we were talking about this a little bit earlier. Star Trek, at least in the beginning, did not really hit on a lot of religious themes, or at least it tried to shy away from some of that. Even to the point where in Next Generation, there are some statements that religion sort of went out of style or kind of faded from popularity at some point in the future. But DS9 really reestablished very strong spiritual storylines in the Bajorans, a very spiritual people. So the idea there being that even though you can have this amazing advanced technology and yet still be extremely spiritual and have strong religious beliefs. You know, I'll just hit this and then open this up for discussion. But Star Trek now hits Lower Decks hits what they believe to be sort of enlightenment. We get O'Connor suddenly, and it happens very quickly. He suddenly, you know, how many sort of tropes or you know, stereotypes, I guess, can we capture in just a few minutes? But the writers do a good job packing a lot in here, because O'Connor starts to rise. You know, he floats, he starts to shine, and then he says, "Let's see," he says. Wow, that actually burns. Is this supposed to be happening? It burns. I don't want to ascend. No. So, okay, he's regretting it. And then suddenly time has no meaning. Oh, wait, now he's not subject to temporal dynamics. I'm everywhere and nowhere. I can see everything. You know, I'm thinking the Highlander or something like that. I'm turning into pure energy. You know, we've heard this before. Why is it taking so long? I see Abraham Lincoln. The universe is balanced on the back of a giant koala. Have to admit, I haven't heard that one before, but that's pretty good.
It's turtles all the way down, man.
Right. Why is he smiling?
Yeah.
What does he know? The secret of life is... And then, of course, fade to black. He's gone.
Only his shoes remain. So.
Yes.
There are no shoes in whatever afterlife there is.
Wherever he is, there are no shoes. What does that say? My goodness, Josh, Nari, I mean, there's just so much here. It may not be legal. It's more philosophical or religious, perhaps. But thoughts, reactions.
Yeah, I love this sequence. It was such rapid fire comedy. It was an absolute joy to watch. I rewatched it a couple of times afterwards.
I kept thinking of Star Trek: The Motion Picture with Decker and V'ger, and like it's the reverse of that. Of, you know, instead of this looking like, you know, the birth of a new life form, it burns and reacting in horror, because maybe the human mind's not meant to comprehend that. It's not capable of comprehending that. So I found it very entertaining, and for the entire Ascension plot line that they had, there were lots of fun references to either Q or the Traveler. There were others that they could have thrown in, but they didn't. And it was just brilliant. And it was just
lots
very
of fun, right? Nari, what did you think?
Yeah, I also loved it. I think that it also, again, ties into the potential theme of, you know, it's good to be happy with where you are.
Even when you ascend, you may not like
it,
right?
As he literally evolved, it turned out to be not so pleasant.
The next plane of existence.
Maybe not what he actually wanted,
Yeah, and ain't all it's cracked up to be. Jeez. Wow.
Yeah, it looked like Hindu, Native American. It was, how many things did they cram in there? And that was amazing.
Yeah, the universe being balanced on the back.
We've heard that one, but we haven't heard a giant koala.
I think, or Hindu religion. So yeah, you're right about that.
Sounds right. Eastern philosophy.
Yeah.
Right.
Turning into pure energy, is that Ascension and Stargate, maybe?
I think that's there. You know, in Highlander, they say like, yeah, you become like sort of all powerful. You can hear, see, feel everything. It's many cultures have their own definition of enlightenment or achieving, sort of, Buddhism, of course, achieving that state of enlightenment. Taoism, sort of wanting that which you have, is the, sort of key of happiness. Josh, you mentioned Q earlier, and watching this scene really reminded me of Q's parting lesson to Picard. And of course, I'm hoping Q shows up in Star Trek Picard, but in All Good Things, and we haven't seen Q since All Good Things, at least in the Next Generation stories. But he says to Picard, that you just don't get it. It's not about mapping stars and studying nebulae, but it's about charting the unknown possibilities of existence. And Picard says, "What are you trying to tell me, Q?" And then Q leans in and he just says, "You'll see. And if you're lucky, I'll stop by." And that's it. So the unknown possibilities of existence, isn't that what O'Connor's getting at this point? He's everywhere and nowhere. He's energy, all these things.
Yeah, and there was a reference to in a Voyager episode where Tom Paris cracked the next level, going
Right.
beyond warp drive, where he
Warp
ended
10,
up evolving
warp
and
10, right?
yeah, beyond warp 10. And there was comments about I was like everywhere. I was with the Klingons and then came back.
Oh yeah, that was the science behind that. Was that it was you achieved warp 10 by literally being everywhere at the same time and then picking one of those locations and ending there.
Yeah. So again, they really love all of the Trek lore, and it's just a very creative team.
Great stuff.
And
hats off to the writing staff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when you think of the other characters that are running around, you have clearly Bajorans. You have what look like Trill. You have the Bajorans. They're look like Klingon human hybrids along B'Elanna Torres. So again, they're just really leaning in, and they're, you have that's next episode, so I won't spoil that. But in the first episode, you did have somebody with the Geordi LaForge visor. So they clearly know what they're doing, and they clearly know how to make fans happy by leaning into everything that we love
of fun
about
here.
Star Trek.
Go ahead, Nari.
Oh, I was just going to say, so do we think that Tendi should be warning people about religious ascension after having witnessed this?
Yeah, is there a duty to warn? Yeah, there's a duty to report because a crew member just disappeared. So he does, like Decker gets listed missing in action. So that needs to happen, and that should include what happened to him.
This is going to be the world's most suspicious Starfleet report, where I swear to God, he just turned into energy and disappeared. I know there are burn marks everywhere, and all that's left are his shoes. But
his shoes. But the Starfleet's seen some weird things, right? So they would.
Yeah, weird. Yeah, quote Janeway, weird's part of the game. So they're definitely, they'll probably go like, okay, it's so weird. Yeah, we've seen this before, or something funky. Yeah,
there's just another fascinating theme here, though, that you're both pointing out, and that is O'Connor has been on this journey of self-enlightenment for so long, and they sort of exaggerate, of course, the things he had to do to get to this point. And ultimately, he finds it again when he's not looking for it. When he engages in a truly selfless act, that's when he achieves what he was trying to reach all along. Not unlike Q, when he lost his powers and he sacrificed himself finally. A truly selfless act. But he finds that the destination, so he's been on this journey for a long time, he finds the destination is not all it's cracked up to be, or certainly not all that he wanted, and he wants to go back now. This kind of hits on the theme of many of the stories that talk about long journeys. And I'm reminded, a good friend of mine back in the day, back in college, he was writing a thesis on the Canterbury Tales, and his thesis was that, the Canterbury Tales, you have all these stories, but that it was unfinished, and you didn't have sort of the last chapter where they actually reach the destination. But his point was that you actually find what you're looking for on the journey. The idea being life is a journey, not a destination, and you need to enjoy the journey. And again, that kind of weaves into the theme of Lower Decks, right? You need to enjoy the journey where you are. Don't spend your whole life trying to get to a destination, because what if you get to that destination and you don't like it? And that seems to be sort of what happens with O'Connor. Mariner is not trying to get promoted, but she gets promoted, doesn't like it, right? And Boimler, maybe that's a word of caution for him. Who's to say that Boimler, when he eventually gets promoted, maybe he's not going to be happy there either. So a lot of great themes here. And so let's just wrap up here at the very end. Things come together. Mariner and Freeman work well together as a team, not surprisingly, mother-daughter team. Freeman takes a lot of pride in that. They come up with this sort of miracle cure. And in the last few moments, suddenly, vamoosh, everything is fine again on both ships. Mariner appears to be part of the in-crowd, but she just can't help herself when Admiral Vassar comes in and inspects the ships and mispronounces I don't know if he mispronounces, but he pronounces sensors as sense-ors. Mariner can't help herself but laugh, point it out to him, insults him, offends him. Maybe he's oversensitive, or maybe Mariner is just pushing the envelope too much. Who knows? But she gets busted back down to the Lower Decks crew again. So Josh, Nari, Mariner's keeping her attorneys pretty busy here, isn't she?
Well, having had an oppressive, micromanaging mother, I could see Mariner not being happy hearing her mom say, "We're going to be a great mommy-daughter team." That was a red flag right there. So that was just asking for trouble. If the mother had just said, "We're a good team," period,
very
probably
different.
Would have been okay. But it's, the mommy quote probably was a bridge too far and unintentionally demeaning, because she clearly loves her daughter. There's a reason why she's not in a penal colony, mining, dilithium.
Penal colonies in the 21st century are resorts.
Apparently, yeah.
Yeah, well, again, first episode of Voyager, it didn't look like Paris was having
That's
fun.
That's true, right. So
there's been inconsistencies about that in the series.
So that's a good point, Josh. Captain Freeman pushing Mariner just a little too far. Is Mariner just a few steps removed from screaming, "No more wire hangers ever"? Anything like that?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know about that, but I would have. She should have. She was so close. So close to a healthy relationship.
She couldn't resist. She herself can't resist pushing the envelope. That's Captain Freeman. Yeah. Nari, any thoughts here on the mother-daughter, parent-child relationship, and Mariner not helping herself once again?
Well, I will also add to what Josh said, or echo what Josh said, that as a half Asian, and the Asian half being my mom, I also had the lovely experience of having a very micromanaging, dominating mother. I also, honestly, if I were Mariner, I don't know why she's not trying to be on another ship. Like, that would solve a lot of these problems. But in any event, I am very sympathetic to her not wanting to be a mommy-daughter team.
Because who doesn't want to live and work with their mom every single day, right?
For long, extended space missions.
No space. As much as we love our parents, I think we can all agree everyone needs a little bit of space, right?
I feel like a lot of children find that they have much better, stronger relationships once they no longer live together. Some children. But I will just posit that I'm not completely sure that it was just lack of self-control that led Mariner to make this final insubordinate, disrespectful joke that got her landed back in the Lower Decks.
Oh, no, it was purely tactical. It was self-preservation of, it was in direct response. The admiral just came in and gave, a medal presentation, said, I'm very, well done. And Friedman had just said, I'm proud of you.
Great. Yeah.
Done.
Fade to
Like,
black.
That would have been the end of an ordinary Star Trek episode.
but not Lower Decks. Not Lower
Yes.
Decks. Yeah. So, just in closing, then, I'll also point out that I thought the mother-daughter angle, the parent-child angle here was very, very nice to see. It's nice that they explored that, a powerful theme to which many can relate. And we also saw this very recently in one of the Discovery shorts when Ensign Tilly is seen talking to her mom, and her mom gives her almost no respect. And Tilly's just screaming and pulling her hair out and saying, well, I'm on the command track program, Mom. Aren't you proud of me? And she said, oh, well, dear, do you remember whenever you tried things and you just failed miserably and you were just so sad? I just don't want that for you. And Tilly's like, thanks, Mom, It's just kind of funny that, again, the more things change, the more they stay the same, right?
Can I add just one? Can
Please.
I add one thing piggybacking off of that?
Please.
I have never identified or empathized so much with a character in Star Trek as on Voyager when Ensign Harry Kim, after they finally managed to reestablish communications with Earth,
I know what you're gonna say.
Who then asks him, "Oh, so you're gonna be an officer soon, right?" "Well, I don't know. There's only so many officer commissions, and we're on single ship." She's like, "Oh, you know what? Let me talk to your captain. I'll just talk to your captain." No, Mom, don't talk. And then it cuts off.
And she's like, "Well, you are like captain of the ship, right?" She's like, "Mom, oh my God." Yeah. Yep. I think many people can relate to that. Yeah.
Oh, the horror of it all. Yeah, and I'm sure that will continue into the 25th century.
And beyond. Very Shakespearean.
Yeah, because what makes people stays the same.
Human nature stays the same.
Yeah. You want to be proud of your kid. You want your kid to do well, but there's there will always be some form of helicopter parent. The name will change, but there will always be some form of that.
At least until we all ascend.
Yes, and we burn, and then we're energy. And
I hope not.
Would that have been funny if O'Connor had also just said "Mom" and then he kind of vanishes?
They did great. There was so much there that they did, and leave something for next time.
So we'll turn it over to you, Josh.
This is fun. This is our, again, depending on how you count, like our 5th Get Vocal because of Force Fest. I enjoy this platform, and we do cross-post these to our YouTube and our podcast channel, and we will keep doing that. We'll also be doing more podcasts off Get Vocal because there's so much happening right now and so much good content. But right now we're going to go through Lower Decks, and we'll then cover other things when we finish Lower Decks. So everyone, thank you for tuning in. Stay safe and healthy. It's still a scary time, and focus on, not being part of the second wave. Take care of yourselves. And with that, everyone, be well and take care. Thank you.